Ace Bailey is the most polarizing player in this NBA draft class and really the most polarizing prospect in recent draft history. With the Philadelphia 76ers holding possession of the third overall pick and in prime position to draft the Rutgers star, could they be lured out of the draft slot in a trade? We do have a recent report of a Western Conference team being interested in moving up to target Ace Bailey, and could this be enough to motivate the Sixers to move down? To want to break down exactly what we know at this current point, talk through it from a Sixers perspective and why I think this is something that could be very appealing to Daryl Morey there, as well as just dive into the overall conversation on Ace Bailey as a whole. Now, before I dive fully into it, I do want to remind you guys, as always, to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. At this point in time, just 31% of you guys watching these videos here on Sixers Digest have subscribed. There are better days ahead on the horizon for this Sixers franchise. We're less than 3 weeks away from the NBA draft and plenty riding on that. So let's dive into the topic of today. And to start right out, we do have this headline coming from Sports Illustrated right here. Shout out to Justin Grasso, who titles his article, Western Conference Team Considered Potential Trade Partners with the 76ers. And to dive into what he writes, he says, with the 2025 NBA draft around the corner, there's been a lot of skepticism building around the Rutgers star Ace Bailey. Since the Philadelphia 76ers currently own the third overall pick, they are in a position to be able to take Bailey, who has been regarded as the number 3 prospect in the draft class. The Sixers have a ton of options. Being in a position where they are drafting to add a role player and not a franchise face right away, the Sixers don't have to commit to selecting that high. At this point, it's being reported that the Sixers are kicking around the idea of trading down and selecting another prospect beyond Bailey territory. Now, to jump in here a little bit, I understand that the Sixers are in a unique position as they are not one of these bottom-feeding teams from last season. Purely based on the numbers and the record, of course they are, but when you think about the full context of this roster with guys like Joel Embiid, like Paul George, like Jared McCain, like Tyrese Maxey, that there is a little bit more positivity in comparison to a team like the Washington Wizards or Utah Jazz or Brooklyn Nets there that are very early in their rebuild. I understand that puts them in a unique position as a franchise. That does not mean that you should not take the superstar swing when you have a chance to do it. And in Ace's case, I do believe that is a player that can start off in a little bit of a lower maintenance role and see his opportunities scale up as the seasons progress. That is something that's very appealing to me and something that I don't think is brought up enough in the Ace Bailey conversation. Now, to continue on with the article that Justin writes, quote, I've heard the Pelicans at number 7 like Ace Bailey, Kevin O'Connor claimed. Quote, Joe Dumars is there. Sounds like he really likes Ace Bailey. Could try to make a trade up to number 3 to Philly or number 4 with Charlotte. That to me is the best case scenario for the Sixers. You trade down from 3 to 7. New Orleans gets their guy. And to continue on with this, he writes, the Sixers have been mentioned in the same breath as multiple prospects beyond Bailey. Prospects like Duke's Common Malawach and Con Knipple, along with Texas's Trey Johnson and Baylor's VJ Edgecombe, all make sense for the Sixers. It's unclear where Daryl Morey's head is at this point in the process. Once the Sixers secured the third pick, the president of basketball operations suggested the team was likely to stay placed at number 3. While that doesn't guarantee the Sixers will ultimately go with Bailey, it seems unlikely they'll pass on the Rutgers wing without moving back. So a lot to break down here, and before I dive into one of these theorized proposals with the Pelicans, my full perspective on this is I do think it's essential for the Sixers to add a legitimate prospect, a guy that could be looked at as a foundational piece of the next generation, playing alongside Tyrese Maxey, alongside Jared McCain, leaning into the youth movement with guys like Quentin Grimes, Adem Bona, Justin Edwards, that quietly the Sixers have assembled a pretty intriguing young core that does paint a brighter future in life post Joel Embiid. But with all that being said here, it is essential to me that they take a pick. Moving down, not so out of the picture, and something I definitely think will appeal to Daryl Morey. Now, there is some financial implications to this, as I've talked about on the channel before, how each draft pick has its specific dollar amount assigned to that draft pick. The number 1 pick gets paid higher than the 2 pick, then the 3 pick, and down goes the list there. The closest thing the Sixers are sort of balancing on is that it does pertain to Gershon Yabusele. Now, to be upfront about this, it does feel incredibly unlikely that Gershon Yabusele is back in a Sixers uniform purely from the contractual and financial situation. I think if all things were equal, that Gershon would love to be back in Philadelphia, but the writing is on the wall a bit that there are teams in a driver's seat to offer him a contract that the Sixers simply cannot. There are some quotes floating around there from Yabusele himself that did not improve my confidence level for his desire to return or the potential for that happening there. We'll dive deeper into that on a separate video and keep this about it, but something to note in mind. If the Sixers are trying to play this dance where they can potentially bring Yabusele back, moving down a couple picks would be very beneficial in creating that opportunity. It is still not a crazy likely world, but did want to put that on the table. Now, one mock trade that has been proposed in regard to this situation, this coming from Sixers Nation here, and it writes, would you trade the number 3 pick plus Lonnie Walker for the number 7 pick and Herb Jones? Surprisingly, out of the 2,100 votes here, 51% saying no. I personally voted yes on this and think this would be a no-brainer. Now, to talk through this from the Sixers perspective, we've already heard plenty of buzz about Herb Jones. The Pelicans are in an even more kind of fascinating spot as a franchise, as they have their theoretical franchise centerpiece in Zion Williamson, but he's been unable to stay on the court at nearly a respectable enough rate, and there are questions even beyond that, on and off the court, for what Zion has brought to the franchise. If that lineup is fully healthy, you can talk yourselves into that Pelicans team being at least respectable and in the Western Conference mix. But how many seasons can they continue to run that back? And I do wonder if they're looking to take some sort of superstar swing in the same way that Kevin O'Connor is reporting that they are attracted to Ace there. Now, from the Sixers' perspective, Herb Jones would obviously be a difference maker from a perimeter defense kind of standpoint. He is, I would say, a replacement for that Kelly Oubre-like role, and what I mean by that particularly is a guy who operates in the dunker spot, who is comfortable guarding ball handlers on the perimeter, really has carved out a little niche for himself that Kelly certainly has on this Sixers team. I know plenty of you in the comments will argue that his role is larger than it should be, and I can understand that point and kind of agree with that. I give Kelly a ton of credit for adjusting his game to be more malleable and fit this Sixers team in a way that he is playing drastically different than we saw from him in Phoenix, in Golden State, in Charlotte, that he's playing a more winning brand of basketball. That has not directly translated the same team success there, but I do think he deserves a little more love than that than is sometimes talked about. But with that being said, the defensive strides that Kelly Oubre Jr. has taken do not make him Herb Jones, and I think you can make a legitimate case that there is a pathway to Jones becoming arguably the premier perimeter defender in the league, if not certainly a guy with all defensive potential that very well is going to be very well served to guarding opponents' best player and their top wing options, which is particularly appealing when looking around the Eastern Conference when you have to guard the likes of players like Jason Tatum, with the Boston Celtics still holding that kind of gold standard. We will see ultimately what happens, the Pacers winning the East this year, but nonetheless, that was an interesting trade that popped to mind. Now, with that, the Sixers would obviously still hold their pick and move down to 7. Once again, my core belief that they have to make a selection in this draft, even if it is a couple selections deeper. To take a look at how things would play out here, so let's walk through the exercise if they were to make that exact swap, and I'm sure there would be more details to come in the mix there. But in this situation, if they drop down to 7, obviously the Pelicans are moving up to 3 to get Ace Bailey there. The Hornets, likely VJ Edgecombe, that I don't see anywhere in the world that he slips below 7. I do think Trey Johnson and the Jazz are an awesome match at 5, and do think that is how things play out. And then that's where things really open up. I don't know the direction the Wizards go at 6. I've heard a lot of buzz about Derek Queen being connected to him. He's a player that grew up essentially in their backyard, was teammates with plenty of some of the players on the roster, and a guy who, obviously would like to stay in that location. So both between Wizards personnel directly there and Derek Queen have been kind of open in wanting that to be the case there. And it was Bub Carrington, as the name was slipping my mind, for who he was playing with growing up, that they grew up in the same neighborhood and knew each other quite well. So it wouldn't shock me if they go out of the box and make that type of move. Also, a guy like Con Knipple certainly could go off the boards and is a guy I think could be plug and play on just about any NBA team. That applies to the Sixers directly here. While I've been anti-Con Knipple from the 3rd pick perspective, because I do think that there is a bit of a low ceiling for what he can be at the NBA level, if you're walking away with him with the 7th pick, you should feel pretty great about that on top of Herb Jones, if that is the type of deal that does go down. You also could take a swing with a guy like Kamen Maluach here, and Maluach is a guy I very much believe in as a prospect. I do think if the Sixers go that direction, it is a little telling to the belief in Joel Embiid moving forward, but there is a point where you have to face that brutal reality, and maybe laying the foundation for this next generation of having Maluach playing alongside his fellow Duke product in Jared McCain, with Tyrese Maxey being kind of the star of the show, and once again, guys like Quentin Grimes and the rest of the youth movement that has come does make some sense there. Jeremiah Fears is also a guy that if you want to take that upside swing, I see the vision with Fears. And this is a bit of a hot draft take of mine, but I do think there's a world where we fast forward to this draft in the long haul, and we're talking about Jeremiah Fears in the way that Dylan Harper is currently talked about. I don't see the gap as that notable between them, and Fears, I would say, is certainly more raw and not there yet. But when you look at some of the bursts, the way they attack the basket, splitting double teams is a clear strength of both of these guys. There's a lot to like there. So if they're dropping down to the 7th pick, this is a move that would make a ton of sense to me. I get it. That means they lose out on Ace, but if Herb Jones is the plug and play solution there, you kind of get check the box of a win now addition while still being capable of taking this long-term upside swing. If they stay within this top 10 or top 12-ish, I'm completely satisfied with this type of deal. I like Ace Bailey. I'd be completely content staying at 3 and selecting Ace Bailey, but if you can get that sort of upgrade while only moving down a handful of slots, that is something that could make a lot of sense for the Sixers franchise overall. So I do want to hear from you guys, your thoughts on that particular trade, and if you are completely sold, if you think it would be a mistake to move down. And just for the record here, I have seen a couple of the comments of a team never wins a trade when they move down in the draft. I just don't think that is accurate or true there. I'll use the Sixers as a direct example here. Now, let's not forget the Boston Celtics moving from the first pick to the third pick. They walk away with Jason Tatum. The Sixers were the team to climb up to the first pick and selected Markelle Fultz. Now, obviously, there are other situations and factors that play into this. Thoracic outlet syndrome that Fultz ultimately contracted was not anything that we could have predicted here. But the point being that the draft, there is an inherent randomness to this that is difficult to fully assess. You go back down the line, there are more misses than hits, and that's the unfortunate reality. So with this direct situation, you get a little bit of more of a sure bet, and you know what Herb Jones is and can still take that swing with the 7th pick. This is obviously dependent on the Pelicans having that much of a desire to move up, and I honestly think you can make a case that you can command a tighter or a tougher bargain than just that particular trade, potentially a swap down the line or adding a little bit more draft capital, which could put them in a better position moving forward. The framework of this deal is something that I think Daryl Morey will very much be intrigued by and something that I could make sense. The root of it is still involved in a team wanting to climb up to the 3rd pick or falling in love with Ace Bailey to the extent that they view him as a franchise cornerstone, but keep that in mind here. Daryl Morey is going to answer every single phone call that comes his direction regarding this specific pick, and this is a monster decision for the future of the franchise. So let me know what you guys think about all that there. Would you be willing to make that exact swap and to pull up the trade one more time? And once again, I do think they could potentially drive a bit of a stiffer bargain here, but would you trade the 3rd pick in Lonnie Walker for the 7th pick and Herb Jones? Give me your thoughts on this below and any other draft takeaways that you want me to dive into here. Appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning into this video. As always, make sure you are hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, and anything else that is on your mind in the comments. Thank you guys for listening one more time. I'll be back talking with you next time. Peace.